Investment advisory services offered through Alpha Capital Management, LLC, a SEC-registered investment advisor. Alpha Capital Management, LLC, and SWAN-Capital are independent entities.
What your money would say. Andrew McNair. Money Talks. Are you listening? Money Talks. Are you listening? Money Talks. Are you listening? What your money would say with Andrew McNair.
We're live here on What Your Money Would Say. I'm your host, Andrew McNair. And for the next 30 minutes, we're going to take financial chickens and make them financial swans. Because we believe as a retiree, you deserve to sleep well at night. And on What Your Money Would Say, we like to educate retirees so you can finally do that. You know, you and your spouse have worked your entire life, putting 3 kids through college, saving in your 401k plan, and even finding a little bit of money to give to your charity and your church along the way. And it's time that you enjoy your golden years. Now, remember, on What Your Money Would Say, we're live, so the phone lines are open. So if you want to call with your personal question about your retirement plan or your estate plan, give us a call at 478-3116. That's 478-3116. Now, I'm looking forward to today's topic. We're going to talk about a topic that affects every Floridian and mostly everyone in the United States that either owns property or that has rental real estate. We're going to talk about property taxes, and we're going to speak to the horse's mouth. We're going to bring on Chris Jones, our county's property appraiser, who knows a thing or two about property values and property taxes. So you don't want to miss our conversation in just a few moments on today's show. But before we do that, I want to share with you an upcoming event we have here at SWAN-Capital, and that is our Social Security Class 101 at the University of West Florida. It's a college class that I'll be teaching exclusively for retirees. Yep, we're going right back to school. And we're going to talk about some very important topics. We're going to answer some very important questions. As a retiree, like when should you take Social Security? Should you take it at 62, 66, or 70? Is Social Security going to be there for me? I'm worried about, with all this financial stress on the government, is Social Security going to go bankrupt? Is it going to be there for me and my spouse? And finally, as a retiree, how do you maximize your Social Security benefits? Now, this is our last class of the year for 2013, so you don't want to miss this class. It's going to be November 12th at the University of West Florida from 6 to 8 o'clock. And you can RSVP at SWAN-Capital, that's Swan like the bird, -Capital, or you can call our office at 850-380-9558. That's 850-380-9558. Now, in just a few minutes, like I just shared with you, we're going to bring on Chris Jones, and we're going to talk about property taxes. But I did want to answer a question that we had from a viewer. And the question, it says, Andrew, I'm currently invested in CDs. What options do I have? And that's a great question, because in this low interest rate environment, it's hard. It's hard to find other alternatives. But the short answer is there is options. You just have to search hard, and you got to look under a lot of rocks to find some really good alternatives. But the key is not taking more risk, because as a retiree, you need more guarantees in a world of uncertainty when you get to this point in life. And we like to pride ourselves at SWAN-Capital. We help people get off their assets. We help people get off their non-earning assets and find ways where we can earn money in this low interest rate environment. And here's why I don't like CDs, and I'm not a big fan of them. And if you have CDs, it's time maybe to potentially look at some alternatives, maybe an escape plan to get out of those GBS accounts. And people say, well, what's a GBS account? That stands for Going Broke Safely. And that's exactly what CDs are. They're GBS accounts. You know, you feel good. You know, they're secure, they're safe. But are they really? Or is it just a security blanket? See, CDs are default risk-free. So you can worry about, as long as, you know, the bank goes out of business, the government will, as long as they fulfill their promises, which is maybe not, they will pick up the tab if that bank goes out of business and give you back your money. That's what FDIC insurance is all about. However, you have to worry about all the other risks that go along with CDs. The first one I want to focus on is purchasing power risk. She asked, what other alternatives there are. If you stick with CDs, you can see that your purchasing power will go down every year if you're only making 0.5% in CDs. Right now, CDs are averaging a little less than 1%. But inflation, if you look for the last few decades, has averaged around 3%. So we're going backwards super fast. It almost feels like a treadmill. If you're trying to go long distance, go for a run outside, but don't expect to get anywhere if you're on a treadmill. And that's exactly what many retirees are facing. They're on the low interest rate treadmill. They feel good. We're going safe. We're doing some action, but we're not going anywhere. And I have this really nice, fun chart that I wish I could show you. It shows the average for every decade since 1910. And not always has inflation averaged 3% nicely. Sometimes it's been in the 70s over 8%, 7 to 8%. In the 80s, around 5%. So it's not always that easy 3% that we can plan on. It can go higher and lower. But if we're in CDs, which is potentially a liquid asset, but sometimes is illiquid, because sometimes, let's say you have an emergency. You can't just take out 5%, 6% out of your CD. You have to take out the whole thing and pay a penalty. That was another thing. I'm just not a big fan of CDs, and many of my clients are not invested in CDs because emergencies do happen. Life happens. And if you want 5% of what you have in CDs, you got to liquidate CDs to do that. But that doesn't have to be the case. There are alternatives that I'll share with you. Also, taxes. CDs can be one of the most tax inefficient investments you can make because you have to pay taxes every year. You're missing out on the tax deferral that is an option out there. And if you're paying taxes every year, you're technically out of control. You're hoping that your taxes are low this year so that you don't pay all those gains that you made in that CD to the tax man, to Uncle Sam. Now, there are alternatives. There's tax-deferred investments where you can pay taxes on your watch, not someone else's, which is a great benefit. So again, at SWAN-Capital, we help people get off their assets. We help them find alternatives where they can find a better interest, they can find higher interest, and they can find alternatives that they don't have to feel so locked up in CDs, where you can take up to 10% penalty-free. Wouldn't that be nice? Where you can make higher than just 1%. Also, a topic that you need to look at is risk. I'm speaking to the seniors right now. If you're still driving in your 70s, 80s, and 90s, and you get in a car accident or someone slips on your property, the money in checking, savings, and CDs are not protected from lawsuits and creditors. So you want to make sure if those assets are in your name that, gosh, what do? You try to drive safer? No, you look for alternatives that can add an extra layer of lawsuit and creditor protection. And those are some of the alternatives that at SWAN-Capital we help our clients do. So if you're interested in some of those alternatives, give our office a call at 850-380-9558. That's 850-380-9558. Now, I've been looking forward to bring on Chris Jones, our property appraiser, because he has the insights into what property values have been doing and what potentially they could be doing in the future. So, Chris, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here, Andrew. Thank you for having me.
Now, I've been looking forward to speaking with you because in Florida, we don't have state income tax, but we do have property taxes. And in today's show, we're talking a lot about taxes, in particular property taxes. So I wanted to speak to the horse's mouth. If you will, Chris, tell them a little bit about your role as property appraiser and some of those misconceptions.
Certainly. The job is really self-defining. My job is property appraiser. As property appraiser, we appraise property. The second most important issue that we deal with, we also administer all the exemptions. Most people are familiar with the homestead exemption. And there's a litany of them that are out there available for the public. But strictly my role is to appraise property. We do not, as property appraiser, even though my name is on the trim notice that went out in August, it is a proposed tax bill.
How kind of them to put your name right next there.
Yeah, the state loves it. And then Janet Hawley will mail out, she's the tax collector, she will mail out the tax bills here November 1st.
Coming up.
Very, very right around the corner, very close. But the taxing authorities, as the value that we place on property is certainly part of the equation for your property tax bill, but those values have to be sustained and be able to be substantiated. And if there's a problem with their value, they need to come see us. The value issue is what we can control, and if we're wrong, we want an opportunity to take a look at it and correct it if we are wrong, or explain to you what we're seeing in the market and how we derived at that value. Now, as
and
far
your
as
office is exceptionally friendly. So if you ever have a question about your property values, be sure to call Chris Jones's office. Now, if it's about taxes, you're not always the guy, right, to complain about taxes.
Andrew, you're 100% correct. The tax rate is the other side of that equation. That tax rate, and if you look at your bill or you look at your trim notice, you'll see multiple taxing authorities that have the right under law to levy a rate against that value to produce an income that which is really their budgets. And you look at the water management district, the county, the school board, and if you live in the city, you get the city, and then also there's the city of Century. So those entities are the benefactors of the tax rate and the tax revenues, and they alone are the ones that decide where those dollars are expended.
Right. So you handle that part of the equation of the property evaluations.
Correct.
The school board and the other authorities available that can tax and that need those revenues are the other side of the formula.
100% correct.
And that's good for you to know, because in November, when you're complaining about taxes, you might want to look at those officials, not Chris Jones, because he's taking care of you on the property side. With your side, with property values, you probably know what's been going on. You've been doing this for how many years now?
I've been in the appraisal business over 30 years.
So you've seen a lot of things go on.
You know, Andrew, I have. I've seen the market. I've never seen anything like we've seen in the last, say, 10 years.
Sure.
The market, the previous buildup, the natural disaster we called Hurricane Ivan was like pouring gas on a fire, and then the subsequent downfall in the real estate market. I've never seen anything peak and bottom like we saw.
And what do you think that's from?
Cheap money, people that got loans that shouldn't have had loans.
Right. A lot of ninja loans out there.
Yeah, and a lot of it, I think, there. We played. You remember the game musical chairs when we were kids, and
Sure.
you had 5 people in 4 chairs. Music stopped, everybody sits down. That's what I equate the condo market, the condominium market to. Because if you remember back in the early '90s, the NASDAQ market, you could be blind and throw a dart and expect 15 to 20% return.
Right.
Though that market fell, those immature real estate investors or novice real estate investors came out of that market going, where do I put my money? Condominiums were the hot commodity at the time. They could buy a contract for less than $5,000, flip the contract, make $25,000. Well, if one was good, 3 was better. And they continued doing this. It was a house of cards.
And the problem is who got suffered was the last person in the chair.
Last one in, and that's exactly what happened. And then the value started imploding. They overbuilt, and we saw that. And then it filtered into single-family market and eventually into the commercial market. And then we had the Great Recession, which probably, and you know better than I, that if we hadn't had certain mechanisms in place in the financial markets,
could have been a lot worse.
Could have been called the Great Depression phase 2.
Sure. Now, believe it or not, people's attention span is kind of short. So that Great Recession, we're getting farther and farther away from it. I mean, it's hard to believe that we're about 5+ years away from it. With it coming back, how is that going to affect property values? And when 2008 collapsed, how did that affect property values?
Well, since the markets collapsed and we started seeing that decline in 2006, we've reduced values. This past year, we saw a flattening of the single-family market, and really in the last quarter of this year, we started seeing some increases. The condo market, there's a lot of interest now. They're starting to move. Single families are starting to move, and Florida. There's some major leaders: California, Florida, Arizona, that were leaders in the foreclosure debacle, and
not a good leader to be in.
Not a good leader to be in, and we're still not out of that woods. But what I think the positive thing to take away from this is that values are starting to creep up, builders are starting to re-engage. There's some momentum in the market,
sure,
and we hope that carries through. we need to continue keeping rates low. We need to in our area here, we got to create some momentum on some job creation.
Absolutely.
And I think if we can keep rates low, foreclosures are up, but that doesn't concern me as much because there's some clearing out of some of the banks
clearing out inventory,
and that's okay.
And they're doing it pretty responsibly. They're leaking it out. They didn't flood it like they did a couple years ago.
And that's very wise of them, because at one time 30% of our real estate sales were bank influenced, either short sale or foreclosures. They were bidding against themselves. So if they kept flooding it, I think they were wise to do that. Where we go in the future, I think that I really believe that we've turned a corner, and we can continue this momentum. We're going to see values increase, and
maybe not at the 10%, the 12% like we saw in 04 and 03.
I totally agree. I think what we're going to see is a more
which
moderate,
wasn't sustainable.
Not sustainable. Actually, if you take and see where the market is now, and if you'd have gone prior to the hyperbole increase in values and what people were paying, and you drew a normal straight line on a graph, we'd be right where we are today. So we had that huge peak, the huge valley, and we're about where we should be. So I think you're looking at 6-8% normal appreciation, 0.5% a month in values, and I think that is sustainable going forward. And I say 6 to 8. It depends on where you're at.
Sure.
You know, waterfront, not waterfront, and there's micro markets
in
within
pockets.
Yes. So I really believe that going forward, that the value side is so people can start thinking about moving up. They got a family. They've been a young married couple in a small home and hadn't been able to sell, move up. Values coming back. Maybe they can sell and move up to another home, and we create that synergy and be moving forward.
Which is so encouraging for so many families to hear that, is that we're getting back to what the market level should be. So that's great news. When it comes to the actual property appraising and it going into your taxation, how is that done? We were talking about some amendments that actually protected a lot of families, but when 2008 happened, sometimes they saw an increase when they didn't expect it.
Well, what you're exactly talking about is in Florida, we have passed the Constitutional Amendment 92 called Save Our Homes. And what it really does is it protects homesteaded property owners to the tune of any increase in value can only be 3% a year or the CPI. The average CPI back during those
CPI
periods,
stands for?
Consumer Price Index. And that 3% cap afforded a lot of property owners a huge savings as values went up. But that sword cuts both ways. When values started falling, it only affects the market value. As long as there's a difference between your cap value and your market value, you're going to get that CPI or the 3% every year. So people kept seeing that creep, and they were eroding their savings. So while some people may have seen a reduction in their actual taxable value, many did not. So that created a confusion. And now we have a new constitutional amendment we talked about that not only protects homestead owners, but non-homestead investors, if you will, second homeowners that come to Florida.
I appreciate that. I just bought a rental house.
There you go. Capped at 10% a year. Can't go up any more than that.
Which is fantastic returns, and which I wouldn't expect, for it to be so generous. And if you were thinking about how that applies to you on the amendment side, property values were going up 10 and 12% every year through, 01 to 05. The CPI was going up so much. So what that provided you was a generous gap in between the market value and what your exemption was. So it was a huge, generous offer for that amendment. Helped a lot of families.
Yeah, to put it, if you had a $100,000 house and you saw a 10% increase, instead of paying taxes on $110,000, at the max you would go up is to $103,000. So
Wow.
That's several $100s in taxes that you'd be saving.
Now, speaking about savings, there's a lot of exemptions, potential discounts for people in their property taxes here in Escambia County. And I know you do a great job of marketing, but some families still may have not heard about some of these exemptions. What are a few that people need to know about?
Well, the biggest and the most valuable one to the general population is the homestead exemption. And a few years ago, it moved from $25,000 to $50,000. That's available to anyone that owns a home, occupies it, and makes it their primary residence. They have to be a Florida resident. They'll be asked to prove that. And they have to own and occupy it prior to January 1 of the tax year. And they just need to come to the office with proof of ownership and Social Security numbers for each owner, and we can sign them up.
That's pretty easy.
That's easy. The other one that we're, by the way, I want to thank all your listeners out there that serve our country in the military. Our area is very fortunate to have a lot of retirees and active duty as well, but there are numerous exemptions that are available to our veterans, and from a total exemption, if they're totally disabled, there's a percentage disability for their percentage of disability.
Right. If you're service connected, maybe 30%, that's going to affect your property taxes.
You could basically get a 30% discount. So it's tied exactly to the percentage that VA gives you, your percentage disability as dictated by the VA.
What a great thing for the people that serve.
It's great. And the other, there's deployment is one of our theaters that are active now. They're hot theaters, and they're defined, and they can call and find those out. But if they're on active duty deployed, there is an exemption for those days that they're deployed. So there's numerous, and there's many more. And encourage your listeners, if they have any questions on any of those exemptions, please contact our office.
Now, is there any way online they can access any of those exemptions or look them up?
Yes.
Where would they go?
They need to go to escpa.org, and anybody can navigate that site, because if I can, anybody can. But it's very user friendly, and if you don't get the answer to the question, you pick up the phone and call me or call one of my staff. We'll be glad to help you.
Fantastic. With it being November, we know that a couple of things that are going to be coming out. They're going to have how much their taxes are going to be owed coming out in November. January, you'll be reinforcing the exemptions that are available. What about next November? Are there any amendments in the works?
We talked earlier, I've been doing this over 30 years, and I've seen more changes in the last 5 through constitutional amendments to the Florida Constitution than I did in the previous 20.
Wow.
So last year, during the 2012 general election, we had 5 constitutional amendments affecting the way we pay property taxes. And that's a lot. That's a lot. There was 3 that passed that are available, and those are on our website. Right now, during early meetings with our legislative delegation, I don't see any, but stay tuned. We don't know yet. But I can assure you, if there is, in the 2014 election, if there's any constitutional amendments placed on the ballot, we will be out educating the voters and the public on those issues.
Well, thank you for your commitment to that education. I know you do a lot of speaking to groups. You're constantly sending out publications to homeowners, so we appreciate your education. If you're just tuning in to What Your Money Would Say, we have Chris Jones, our property appraiser. We talked about property values. We talked about the macro level. We talked about the micro level here in the county and how that's improving and how that we're back to some normals finally, and we can see some steady growth potentially in the future. Also, if there's exemptions, if you think that you may be eligible for some exemptions out there, please go check out. What website do they need to check out again?
Go to escpa.org. Really, it stands for Escambia County Property Appraiser.org.
And if you check that out, there's plenty of exemptions that are potentially available for you that you may not have used. We talked about some potential amendments. We don't have anything yet, but Chris Jones is dedicated to educating the community on these potential amendments that they need to know about and vote for. Chris, I want to thank you for coming on the show, and thank you for stopping by on What Your Money Would Say.
Andrew, thank you for having me.
What Your Money Would Say. Today's financial landscape can be rough. One of the most important aspects of planning is choosing the right guide to help you navigate the road to retirement. Andrew McNair and the team at SWAN-Capital is dedicated to providing the very best service in the retirement planning industry today. SWAN-Capital is a full-service independent wealth management firm dedicated to providing guaranteed custom income plans that you cannot outlive. Contact Andrew McNair at SWAN-Capital 850-380-9558. That's 850-380-9558. The difference between SWAN-Capital and you retire once. We help people retire every day. You should be enjoying your retirement years, not letting worry keep you up at night. SWAN-Capital. Sleep well at night. Contact Andrew McNair at SWAN-Capital, 850-380-9558. That's 850-380-9558. Again, that's 850-380-9558.
The Veteran Benefit Project, founded by Andrew McNair, president of SWAN-Capital, is a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping veterans and widows of veterans with long-term care expenses by qualifying for the VA's Aid and Attendance Benefit. Learn how to receive over $24,000 per year from the VA towards long-term health care. There is absolutely no fee associated with our assistance to the veteran, the widow of a veteran, their families, or any retirement community. Our goal is to preserve the dignity of the veteran and to reduce the dependency on the Medicaid system. Again, learn how to receive over $24,000 per year from the VA. Contact the Veteran Benefit Project, 850-380-5137. That's 850-380-5137. 850-380-5137. Look us up on the web, veteranbenefitproject.com. At the Veteran Benefit Project, we are committed to helping you secure the benefits you deserve.
Retirement expert Andrew McNair. Changing the retirement paradigm. Now back to what your money would say. Brought to you by SWAN-Capital.
Welcome back to What Your Money Would Say. I'm your host, Andrew McNair. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Chris Jones, our county property appraiser, and how he talked about the potential for rates to continue going up in our property evaluation. So that's really good news. And also he talked about property taxes and how that you could potentially save hundreds of dollars through exemptions that you may or may not be receiving already. So be sure to check out the website or call his office to see if there's any exemptions or discounts that you may be eligible for. Now, before Chris Jones' interview, we were talking about what other options that were available to families that own CDs, that put their trust and their nest egg in CDs. And we talked about some of the things that are the bad part of CDs. You know, CDs are relatively a very safe investment, but you got to worry about purchasing risk. And making 0.5% will not keep up with inflation. So we talked about some potential alternatives. And at SWAN-Capital, that's what we do. We help clients get off their assets, and we help them find alternatives where they can earn higher interest than in CDs, where we can get a guaranteed 1%. Also, another thing I wanted to really focus on is, and really shed light on, is that CDs, checking accounts, and savings accounts are not protected from lawsuits and creditors. They're what we call low-hanging fruit for attorneys. So we want to make sure that if you ever, God forbid, got in a lawsuit or creditor situation because of a car accident, because maybe someone slipped on your property, that your assets, your nest egg, are not unprotected from these incidents. And there's alternatives to CDs that where we could do that. So if you're interested in some of those alternatives, give our office a call at SWAN-Capital at 850-380-9558. That's 850-380-9558. Also, I want to share with you again, our Social Security Class 101 is coming up, and this is the last workshop for 2013. We're going to help retirees learn how to receive more from Social Security, where, you know, you don't have to take it at 62. We're going to talk about all the options. Do you take it at 62, 66, or 70? Will Social Security be there? We're going to answer those important questions that you need to know for your retirement. It's been a pleasure having you on What Your Money Would Say, and I look forward to seeing you next week.